Tragedies like this are the darker side to the glittering medals and standing ovations of the gymnastics world. It is not always gravity-defying flips and perfect landings. Here are the 10 most tragic events in gymnastics history. First, Julissa Gomez. Julissa Gomez was a rising star in gymnastics, a determined 15-year-old with Olympic dreams. She had the talent, the work ethic, and the drive. With all these, she was set to take the world by storm. But in 1988, just months before the Seoul Olympics, everything changed in an instant. It happened during a warm-up at a competition in Tokyo. Julissa was practicing the Yurchenko vault, a risky move that involves a round-off onto the springboard, a back handspring onto the vaulting horse, and a blind landing. In the 1980s, gymnastics equipment wasn't as refined as it is today. The vaulting horse was still a solid, unforgiving block, and the springboard could be unpredictable. On her approach, Julissa's foot slipped off the springboard. She lost momentum and wasn't able to complete her rotation. Instead of landing safely, she crashed headfirst into the vault. The impact was catastrophic. Her neck snapped instantly. She was paralyzed from the neck down. At just 15, Julissa's gymnastics career was over, but the real battle was just beginning. She was rushed to a hospital in Japan where doctors stabilized her, but her condition was grim. Soon after, she was flown back to the United States, where her parents became her full-time caregivers. She could no longer move, no longer breathe on her own. Every function of her body relied on machines. For 3 years, Julissa fought to survive. Her family held on to hope, but complications from her paralysis were relentless. Then, in 1991, an infection took hold, and her body couldn't fight it anymore. Julissa Gomez passed away at just 18 years old. Julissa's story will always be one of the sport's most heartbreaking tragedies. A young gymnast with Olympic dreams, taken too soon by a sport she loved. The Yurchenko vault, already considered dangerous, came under intense scrutiny. Over time, safety measures improved. Springboards became more stable, vaulting tables replaced the old horse, and coaches placed more emphasis on technique and readiness. Next, a rising star who was pushed past her limit. Vtoraya Elena Mukhina. Elena was supposed to be the Soviet Union's next great gymnastics champion. At just 20 years old, she had already won the all-around title at the 1978 World Championships, dethroning Nadia Comaneci. With the 1980 Moscow Olympics approaching, she was expected to lead the Soviet team to gold, but behind the scenes things were falling apart. Elena had been pushed to her absolute limit. Soviet training methods were brutal, hours of practice every day, little concern for injuries, and an expectation to perform no matter what. She had already suffered a broken leg in 1979, an injury that should have sidelined her for months. But with the Olympics coming up, there was no time to rest. Coaches pressured her to keep training, rushing her recovery. One skill in particular was terrifying her, the Thomas Salto. It was a risky tumbling pass with a blind landing, originally designed for men's gymnastics. Elena knew it was dangerous. She told her coaches she wasn't ready, but in the Soviet system, saying no wasn't an option. In July 1980, during a training session, the thing she feared most happened. She attempted the Thomas Salto, but didn't complete the rotation. Instead, she crashed headfirst onto the mat. Her neck snapped on impact, instantly paralyzing her from the neck down. Just like that, her gymnastics career was over. But what followed was even more devastating. The Soviet Union, already obsessed with maintaining its image of athletic dominance, largely erased Elena from public view. There were no press conferences, no official statements. She simply disappeared from the sport. For the rest of her life, Elena lived in a small Moscow apartment, bound to a wheelchair. She was completely dependent on others, unable to do even the simplest tasks on her own. She spoke candidly about what had happened, about how she had been pushed beyond her limits, and about how the Soviet system treated gymnasts like disposable machines. She lived for 26 more years before passing away in 2006 at just 46 years old. By then, gymnastics had moved on. But her story remains a reminder of what happens when ambition outweighs an athlete's well-being. Next is another tragic end for a gymnast who fell prey to extreme pressures. 3. Christy Henrich. Christy was no doubt a fighter. She wasn't the tallest or the strongest, but she had something just as valuable: relentless determination. Born in 1972, she quickly made a name for herself in the US gymnastics scene. Rising through the ranks with her precision and work ethic, she was on track for greatness. The first step was to make the US Olympic team. But gymnastics in the late 80s and early 90s had an ugly side. Coaches and judges weren't just critiquing routines, they were scrutinizing bodies. At this point, the pressure to be thin was suffocating. Gymnasts were told that every ounce of extra weight could cost them medals and that success belonged to those who stayed small. For Christy, that message became an obsession. At a competition in 1988, a judge reportedly told her she was too heavy to ever make the Olympic team. That single comment was like a switch flipping. She began dieting, then restricting, then starving. What started as a goal to stay fit spiraled into something much darker. Her weight plummeted, but she kept competing. Her body weakened, but she kept pushing. Friends and family begged her to get help, but the sport had drilled one lesson into her: pain is just part of the process. By the early 90s, it was clear she was in serious trouble. She was no longer the powerful gymnast she once was. Her bones protruded, her energy faded, and her body was breaking down. Eventually, she was forced to retire, but leaving gymnastics didn't mean escaping the disorder. Anorexia had taken hold of her, and she couldn't shake it. She spent years in and out of hospitals, her body barely able to function. At her lowest point, she weighed just 47 pounds. Her family never gave up on her, but there was only so much they could do. On July 26, 1994, Christy Henrich lost her battle with anorexia. She was just 22 years old. Sadly, there was no miracle recovery or triumphant comeback in this story. It was a slow, painful decline, one that exposed the brutal realities of a sport that demanded perfection at any cost. Next, a deadly fall from the uneven bars. 4. Melanie Coleman. Melanie Coleman was the kind of person everyone loved to be around. Hardworking, kind, and full of energy. She wasn't just a gymnast, she was a nursing student, a coach, and a big sister. At 20 years old, she had spent most of her life in the gym, training for hours every day. She had competed at a high level and had earned a spot on the Southern Connecticut State University gymnastics team. On November 8, 2019, she was in the middle of a routine training session on the uneven bars, an event she had performed hundreds, if not thousands, of times before. But that day, something went terribly wrong. While transitioning from the low bar to the high bar, she lost her grip. In a fraction of a second, she slipped and fell. She landed head first. The impact caused a severe spinal cord injury. Coaches and teammates rushed to her side. An ambulance arrived within minutes, and she was rushed to the hospital. Doctors did everything they could, but the damage was irreversible. 2 days later, Melanie passed away. She was just 20 years old. Her family was devastated. She had so much ahead of her: a career in nursing, a life outside of gymnastics. Her teammates, her coaches, and even those who had never met her struggled to understand how quickly everything had changed. But Melanie wasn't just remembered for how she died, she was remembered for how she lived, with passion, kindness, and an undeniable love for the sport and the people around her. Her family established a scholarship fund in her name, ensuring that her legacy would continue to support others. Gymnastics has always been a sport of risk, but for Melanie it was never just about competition. It was about the joy of movement, the friendships, and the dedication to something bigger than herself. Even in her absence, that's the part of her story that continues. Next, a Chinese gymnast who was left paralyzed after the Goodwill Games. Aindam Sanglan. Sanglan was 17 years old, full of talent and energy, representing China on the international gymnastics stage. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, competing at the 1998 Goodwill Games in New York, performing in front of a global audience. She was more than the average gymnast. She was a rising star, known for her powerful vaulting skills and determined spirit. On July 21st, during a warm-up for the vault, she ran down the runway, just as she had done countless times before. But something went terribly wrong this time. As she launched herself onto the vaulting horse, she lost control mid-air. Instead of landing on her feet, she came crashing down head first onto the mat. Immediately, she couldn't move. Coaches and medical staff rushed to her side. She had suffered a severe spinal cord injury, fracturing her 6th and 7th vertebrae. The impact left her paralysed from the chest down. Sang Lan was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she underwent surgery. Doctors stabilised her spine, but they knew the reality. She would likely never walk again. She spent months in the hospital, far from home, learning to navigate a world she had never imagined for herself. But Sang Lan wasn't the kind of person to give up. Instead of focusing on what she had lost, she focused on what she could still do. She became an advocate for disabled athletes and spoke openly about her journey. Instead of retreating into the background, she stayed in the public eye, determined to live a full life. She went on to study journalism, became a TV host in China, and continued to inspire others with her resilience. In 2013, she got married, and later she became a mother, something doctors had once told her would never be possible. Sang Lan's story wasn't just about a tragic accident. It was about what came after, the strength to rebuild, to adapt, and to find a new way forward. Gymnastics had taken so much from her, but it had also given her the discipline and determination to take on the rest of her life with the same unstoppable spirit. Next, a young Romanian gymnast was beaten to death by a coach. Sexta Adriana Jurca. Adriana was a young gymnast with dreams as high as the vaults she practiced daily. At just 11 years old, she trained at Bucharest's prestigious Dinamo Club, a place known for producing champions like Nadia Comaneci. Her coach, Florin Gheorghe, was a 25-year-old trainer with a reputation for demanding excellence. On a November day in 1993, during a routine practice, Adriana faced the balance beam, a piece of equipment that requires precision and nerves of steel. She attempted a challenging routine but faltered, losing her balance and tumbling off the beam. Frustration flashed across Gheorghe's face. He approached Adriana and, without warning, slapped her. The gym fell silent, but he wasn't finished. In a fit of rage, he also kicked her, grabbed her by the neck, and slammed her head against the beam repeatedly, shouting, "This is going to teach you to get over your fear of the beam." Adriana, dazed and in tears, moved to the floor exercise area, as instructed. Gheorghe demanded she perform a complex routine. Each mistake she made was met with more violence, punches, kicks, and strikes with a thick bat. Her pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. In a final act of brutality, Gheorghe threw her to the floor with such force that her spine was driven into her brain. She lost consciousness and was rushed to the hospital, where she remained in a coma for 2 days before succumbing to her injuries. The aftermath was a mix of grief and outrage. Gheorghe was arrested and, in early 1995, sentenced to 8 years in prison for aggravated assault. The court also ordered him and the sports club to pay Adriana's parents $6,000 in damages. However, Gheorghe served only 3.5 years before being released on parole for good behaviour. As you can imagine, Adriana's death cast a long shadow over Romanian gymnastics. Her parents, Maria and Emil Jurca, were left devastated. Maria visited her daughter's grave daily, unable to reconcile the loss. The incident raised questions about the intense pressures young athletes face and the extreme methods some coaches employ in the pursuit of perfection. While Romania had a history of producing gymnastics legends, Adriana's story served as a tragic reminder of the potential human cost behind the medals and accolades. Today, Adriana rests beneath a simple white marble cross near her family home in Bucharest. Her story is a somber testament to the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of safeguarding the well-being of young athletes. Now, our next case proves that death and life-altering injuries are not the only tragedies in the gymnastics world. 7th, Nadia Comaneci's teammates, Georgeta, Rodica Dunca, Emilia. In the 1970s, Romania was a gymnastics powerhouse, churning out champions like Nadia Comaneci, who made history with the first perfect 10 at the 1976 Olympics. But behind those gold medals and flawless routines was a grueling system run by Bela and Marta Karoli, one that pushed young athletes to their limits, often at a terrible cost. Nadia's story of strict discipline, emotional manipulation, and constant demand for perfection is well known. But what about her teammates? Gymnasts like Georgeta Gabor Antohi, Rodica Dunca, Emilia Ebeli, and Ekaterina Sabo have spoken out about the harsh reality behind the scenes. And if their accounts are any indicator, then training wasn't just tough, it was brutal. Even worse, mistakes were met with physical punishment. Some even had their heads slammed against the beam. Verbal abuse was constant. And fear was the driving force rather than encouragement. While the world admired Romania's gymnastics dynasty, these girls were silently enduring relentless pressure and mistreatment. Their sacrifices went unnoticed as they delivered perfect routines under unimaginable stress. And the scars, both physical and emotional, didn't fade when the competitions ended. The Karolias took their methods with them when they defected to the US in 1981. Their training style produced more champions, Mary Lou Retton, the 1996 Magnificent Seven, US women's team, but it also sparked controversy. Stories of verbal and emotional abuse followed them, raising serious questions about coaching ethics and athlete welfare. The stories of Comaneci's teammates have helped shed light on the darker side of elite gymnastics. They've fueled a broader conversation about how young athletes are treated and the price of perfection. Today, the sport is reckoning with its past, and those once silenced voices are finally being heard. 8. The Soviet gymnast exodus. In the late 80s and early 90s, gymnastics saw a major shift. Soviet and Eastern Bloc gymnasts started leaving their homelands for new opportunities. With the fall of the Iron Curtain, many sought better training conditions, coaching jobs, or simply a fresh start. Take Olga Korbut, the sparrow from Minsk. A legend in the 70s, she left the USSR in 1991, settling in the US to coach and share her love for the sport. Then there's Vitaly Sherbo, who won 6 golds at the 1992 Olympics. After the Soviet collapse, he moved to the US, where he built his legacy beyond competition. Natalia Lashchenova, a Latvian star, found herself stuck when Latvia didn't join the unified team in 1992. She retired early and moved to the US to coach, though her immigration status later put her at risk of deportation. And of course, there's Nadia Comaneci, the first gymnast to score a perfect 10. She defected from Romania in 1989, eventually settling in America and marrying fellow gymnast Bart Conner. For these athletes, leaving wasn't just about geography, it was about survival, reinvention, and chasing new dreams. They went from communist training halls to American gyms, from state-funded careers to making their own way. And in the process, they didn't just change their own lives, they helped shape the future of gymnastics worldwide. Next is the largest abuse scandal in sports history, which affected hundreds of gymnasts. 9. Larry Nassar scandal. For decades, Larry Nassar was a trusted figure in gymnastics. As the team doctor for USA Gymnastics and Michigan State University, he treated some of the biggest names in the sport. Parents, coaches, and athletes believed he was there to help, but behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. It started with whispers, athletes confiding in each other that something felt off about their treatments. Nassar insisted his methods were medical, that his invasive procedures were necessary. Some girls questioned it, but who would believe them? He was a doctor, a respected figure, a man trusted by the entire gymnastics community. Then, in 2016, the truth started unraveling. Former gymnast Rachel Den Hollander went public, sharing her story of abuse. More gymnasts followed, and soon it was clear. Nassar had been assaulting athletes for decades under the guise of treatment, while no one stopped him. Investigations revealed that complaints had been ignored. USA Gymnastics had received reports but failed to act. Michigan State University had been warned, but Nassar remained in his position. Even the FBI delayed its investigation, allowing him to continue abusing more girls. By the time the case went to court, hundreds of survivors had come forward. In January 2018, over 150 of them faced him in a sentencing hearing, telling their stories in emotional testimony. Olympians like Ali Reisman, Simone Biles and Michaela Maroney spoke out, demanding justice, not just for themselves, but for all the girls who had been silenced. The judge didn't hold back. She sentenced Nassar to 175 years in prison, making it clear he would never hurt another girl again. The aftermath was huge. USA Gymnastics leadership resigned. Michigan State University paid out millions in settlements. The FBI faced scrutiny for failing to act sooner. But most importantly, the survivors took control of the narrative. They turned their pain into power, demanding change in gymnastics and beyond. The sport will never be the same, and that's the point. The girls who once felt unheard now have the world listening, and no one, no coach, no doctor, no institution will ever hold that kind of unchecked power again. Pattavdu, Anandarao. Ananth Rao was doing what he loved, flipping through the air, pushing the limits of his body. Gymnastics was his passion, his identity. He had over 100 medals to his name, competing at the national level in India. But in 2010, during the Mysore Dasara Games, everything changed in a split second. It was a routine he had done countless times, but this time something went wrong. Mid-somersault, his landing was off. He came down hard, on his neck. The impact was brutal. He couldn't move. He couldn't feel his legs. Rushed to the hospital, doctors delivered the news no athlete ever wants to hear. A severe spinal cord injury at the C6, C7 vertebrae. Paralysis from the waist down. Just like that, the sport that had given him everything was gone. For nearly 2 years, Ananth was in and out of hospitals. Treatments, therapies, nothing seemed to work. He went from being one of the most promising gymnasts in India to feeling trapped in his own body. And to make things worse, financial struggles piled up. The government gave him a small pension, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover his medical expenses. But here's where Ananth's story takes a turn. He wasn't about to just give up. In 2014, he met Chandraprabha, an Ayurvedic therapist who introduced him to a new kind of treatment. Slowly, he started regaining some upper body strength, and somewhere along the way, the two fell in love. They got married, and Chandraprabha became his rock, his biggest supporter in this new chapter of his life. Ananth decided he wasn't done with sports. If he couldn't compete in gymnastics, he'd find another way. He discovered para-athletics and set his sights on the club throw event. He trained every day, using equipment he imported from the UK, pushing himself just like he had in gymnastics. His dream, to represent India in the Paralympics. But he knew he needed a backup plan, so he taught himself video editing and visual effects. He started freelancing, building a new career completely from scratch. Ananth Rao's story isn't just about a tragic accident, it's about resilience. He lost gymnastics, but he didn't lose himself. And even now, he's proving that no matter how life knocks you down, there's always a way to rise again.